Joined now by the Secretary of State for Housing, Communities and Local Government, Michael Gove. Happy New Year to you, Mr Gove. Lots to talk to you about. Should we just start with that, should we? Would we allow Novak Djokovic to take part at Wimbledon if he wasn't vaccinated?
Sorry, Kay, you were asking about Novak Djokovic and Wimbledon. Well, again, there's as we've just heard, there's a complex process going on in Australia. We have to respect the integrity of that process, and Wimbledon is some months away. The thing I would say to anyone is that it is good to get vaccinated. It is good for you. It is good for others, good for society. But with the specific case of Mr Djokovic, well, I'll leave it to the Australian authorities to decide that for the moment. And as I say, there are plenty of sporting highlights before we reach Wimbledon.
Bit of swerve on that backhand. Are we ready to live with COVID here in the UK?
I think we are getting readier to live with COVID, absolutely. I think that what's been striking is the success of the booster campaign. While there are, with Novak Djokovic, one or two high-profile figures who themselves haven't been vaccinated, the overwhelming good sense of the British people has meant that millions of us have been vaccinated, have had our booster, and as a result we've been playing our part in making sure that we relieve the pressure on the NHS and make sure that care is there for those who need it.
And we're ready to cut the isolation period from 7 to 5 days?
Sorry, Kay, I just missed that because I'm afraid that I think I heard your producer in my ear rather than you. I'm so sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry about that. I was just asking, as a result, are we saying that we are ready to cut the isolation period from 7 days to 5 days?
Well, we always keep these things under review. And the most important thing, I think, is to ensure that we are in a position to protect the NHS and to protect public services. So we, at the moment, are in a position where we've reduced the isolation period, as you know, from 10 to 7 days. We'll keep that under review, but it will be the Health Secretary and the Prime Minister who will make any announcement in due course, not me.
Does sound as though the Cabinet is open to it, though.
Well, we always keep things under review because we're always guided by the facts, by the science, and by changing circumstances. So I think it's striking to note that in the United Kingdom overall, particularly in England, we have one of the most open regimes, one of the, essentially, one of the most liberal approaches of any country in Europe. But we also need to balance that with a determination to ensure that we are not overwhelming the NHS. And your question gives me an opportunity just to say thank you to everyone who's been working on the NHS front line for nearly 2 years now to deal with this epidemic. Their hard work, their dedication, their sacrifices are amazing, and we're all in their debt.
Yep, we certainly are. You say we're guided by the science as far as being led by the government is concerned. One wonders how much notice we should be taking of the modelling. The latest modelling that we saw from the London School of Tropical Medicine, they were suggesting that worst case scenario, we would see something like 75,000 deaths from the Omicron variant by the end of April. The latest figures that we had from the 23rd of December, particularly for Omicron, were 14 deaths as opposed to 75,000. Isn't it time we stopped going with the worst case scenario?
Well, I think we need to look at a range of scenarios, and it's always the case that we look at different academic models. Models, by their very definition, are not predictions. They just run through what is likely to happen. And again, at different stages in this pandemic...
I'm sorry to interrupt, Mr Gove, but likely to happen, 14 deaths as opposed to 75,000. Come on.
Sorry, Kate, once again, I'm afraid I heard your producer or one of the excellent technical team in Sky just speaking in my ear there, so I missed your question. I do apologise.
Not at all. I'm sorry about that. I was saying there's a big difference between 14 deaths and 75,000. Some people would say that potentially was scaremongering.
No, I don't think it's scaremongering at all, and no one is setting out to scaremonger. What we are always setting out to do is to ensure that we are in a position to model a range of scenarios and to be ready for those different outcomes. I think it would be a mistake not to model some scenarios where the NHS is under very severe pressure so that we can make sure that the resources are there. I think it would be irresponsible not to have a range of scenarios because we need to be in a position where we can cope with however the virus mutates, however the epidemic develops, and that's why it is right that we have these scenarios. But it's also the case, and you're right here as well, that we stress that these are models, they are not predictions.
How long will lateral flow tests be free?
As long as we need them.
And how long do you think that might be?
Again, one of the things about the pandemic is that it's been impossible to predict with certainty throughout, but it is the case that in this country lateral flow tests are free, and unlike in many other jurisdictions, they're a vital tool in making sure that we can curb the spread of the infection and also that people who need to isolate do so. But as you pointed out right at the very beginning of our conversation, we are moving to a situation, we're not there yet, but we are moving to a situation where it is possible to say that we can live with COVID and that the pressure on the NHS and on vital public services is abating. But it's absolutely vital to recognise that we are not there yet. And as the Health Secretary has reminded us, there will be some difficult weeks ahead, and that is why we all need to continue to test, continue, if we are positive, to isolate, and continue broadly to support the NHS as it goes through a challenging period, but one in which the frontline professionals are doing an amazing job.
So we are considering phasing out lateral flow tests, but not for the coming weeks as we continue to try to deal with the Omicron variant and indeed the Delta variant that is still around over the next few weeks. So not for the next few weeks, in other words, is that right?
Well, as the Prime Minister and others have said, we will do whatever it takes.
Talk to me about why you're here today, which is cladding. £4 billion to help those people that are basically stuck in homes that are unsafe or they can't sell them. Is it going to be a voluntary scheme for these developers to get involved?
Well, we want to say to developers and indeed to all those who have a role to play in recognising their responsibility that we want to work with them. But if it's the case that it's necessary to do so, then we will use legal means and ultimately, if necessary, the tax system in order to ensure that those who have deep pockets, those who are responsible for the upkeep of these buildings pay, rather than the leaseholders, the individuals who in the past were being asked to pay with money they didn't have for a problem that they did not cause.
So you're saying that there could be a developer's tax and you will bring in the full weight of the law to make sure that they cough up?
Yes, and I think it's important to look at this in a balanced way. There are some developers, some people in the property business who have been stepping up to the plate already, living up to their responsibilities, removing dangerous cladding, making sure that buildings are safe. I applaud that work, but there are others who still have more to do, and it's a straightforward question. Should it be those with the big bucks, the big profits, who have been responsible for the construction of these buildings and who are the ultimate owners of these buildings, or should it be individuals who have worked hard in order to get a mortgage and who are now being saddled with costs for faults that were not their responsibility? If you put the question like that, then I think there can only be one answer.
What about people in buildings that have got the challenges with problems other than cladding, insulation, wooden balconies, etc., etc.? The DCLG committee estimated sorting out fire defects could cost something like £15 billion. Are you going to be looking at that as well?
We are. I think the thing about the costs there is that we've just been talking about modelling and estimates and so on. I don't think the costs would be anything like that, but I do think it is necessary to make sure that that buildings are safe. I think it's also important to bear in mind, though, that the overwhelming majority of buildings which are not high-rise buildings are safe. And it's important that we get a proper sense of proportion, that we make sure, firstly, that we get rid of dangerous cladding, that we make those buildings which are currently unsafe totally safe, but at the same time, with other buildings that have been considered to be in scope of particular types of work, it's important that we also get a sense of proportion back. Because one of the problems that that many people living in flats face is that at the moment there is a question mark hanging over the safety of their flats. That means they can't get a mortgage, or others who want to buy the flat can't get a mortgage, and they can't move on. And what we want to do is to tackle the real dangers and restore a sense of proportion.